Today we're going to jump into a really fascinating strategic analysis from historian Victor Davis Hanson. He lays out three potential endgame scenarios for a conflict with Iran. It's a powerful way of looking at how a major confrontation could actually end. So let's get right into it.
But first, let's just start with this one big question. Think about it. In any conflict, what is the endgame? Is it some fixed target you're aiming for from day one, or is it something that kind of shifts and changes as things happen on the ground? It's a question strategists have been wrestling with forever. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll tackle that endgame question itself. Then we'll walk through each one of Hanson's three outcomes: regime change, a military ruler, and a power vacuum. And finally, we're going to put them all side by side so you can see what each one really means.
Okay, so first up, the endgame question. The whole idea here is that the final goal of a war, it's often not set in stone when things kick off.
According to this analysis, a lot of people think leaders go into a conflict with this perfectly clear final objective. But history shows us that's just not how it usually works. War aims get defined and then redefined right in the middle of the chaos. And World War II is used as the perfect example of this.
Take this, for example. In 1943, when Roosevelt and Churchill declared unconditional surrender as the Allied goal, it was practically decided on the fly. And get this, it even caught their own ally, Joseph Stalin, totally by surprise. He thought the goal was just to fight the Nazis to a stalemate. It just goes to show you how fluid these things can be.
Okay, so with that in mind, Hanson's analysis lays out three really distinct ways a conflict with Iran could end. So let's look at each one, from what's described as the best-case scenario all the way down to the worst.
Let's start with what the analysis calls the optimum choice. This is outcome one, a complete and total regime change.
So how would this actually go down? Well, it would start with decisive military pressure that just completely dismantles Iran's ability to fight, forcing the ruling theocracy to basically say, no mas, we give up. That moment would open the door for popular protests to just surge back onto the streets. From there, dissident leaders would step in to form a transitional government, which would then lead to supervised elections and a brand new constitution. But, and this is a big but, this whole scenario really hinges on one huge assumption: that there's a popular, credible opposition just waiting in the wings, ready to step in and govern.
The end result here would be a total 180. Iran would go from being a destabilizing force in the Middle East to potentially becoming a partner, a force for good that could actually help with regional peace.
All right, now for the second outcome. This is the middle ground option, which Hanson has nicknamed the Venezuelan solution.
So what does that even mean, the Venezuelan solution? Well, it's talking about a scenario where a secular, dissident general seizes power from the weakened theocracy. It's likely a nod to periods in history, especially in Latin America, where a military leader stepped in to create stability, kind of bypassing the whole democratic process. It's seen as a pragmatic solution, even if it's not the ideal one.
In this version of the story, the new military leader moves fast and agrees to the key U.S. demands, shutting down the nuclear program, stopping missile development, and cutting off terror funding. So, the main American security concerns get solved. But here's the trade-off. The Iranian people don't really have a say in this, at least not at first. And while a transition to a popular government might be promised down the line, there's absolutely no guarantee it'll ever happen. You're basically making a bet that this new leader will be able and willing to keep their word.
And that brings us to our final outcome, the one described as the worst-case scenario, creating a power vacuum. Or as a source puts it in this very vivid phrase, just letting Iran stew in its own juice.
This phrase, it's pretty memorable, right? It describes a really limited engagement. The idea is that the U.S. would step in just enough to take away Iran's ability to hurt its neighbors, but then deliberately pull back and leave the country's internal future up for grabs.
So what does this hands-off approach look like? Well, U.S. forces would come in for maybe a month or two and systematically take out Iran's Navy, Air Force, missile sites, and nuclear facilities. Then, mission accomplished. They're out. No boots on the ground. The future is left to the Iranian people to figure out, but with one big warning. If the old regime ever comes back, so will we. Of course, you're rolling the dice that the internal power struggle that follows doesn't create something even more dangerous.
So the central logic here is all about limited liability. The goal is not nation building, it's simply defanging the tiger. Once Iran can no longer threaten its neighbors or global trade, the American responsibility is considered over.
Okay, so we've just walked through three very different futures. Now let's actually put them side by side and see how they really stack up against each other.
This table really makes it all click, doesn't it? Let's just walk through it. Look at the new leadership. The outcomes range from a real constitutional government to a secular general, all the way to, who knows, an internal struggle. Now think about the nuclear status. It could be completely dismantled and inspected, or just stopped, or simply contained for now, with a very uncertain future. And just notice how the long-term U.S. role completely flips, from supportive and hands-on to totally disengaged, to a minimal watch-from-a-distance posture. This really lays out the whole spectrum of risk and reward.
So when you boil it all down, what you really have is a clear spectrum. On one end, you have the optimum choice, full regime change, which would require the most investment and risk. On the complete other end, you have a limited punitive strike that just contains the threat but leaves the future wide open. And sitting right there in the middle is that pragmatic but undemocratic military solution.
And all of this leaves us with one final big thought. We've explored three neat theoretical endgames. But in the real world, how much control does any nation actually have in shaping the final outcome of a conflict? It's a heck of a question, and it's a powerful reminder of just how complex and uncertain war and strategy truly are.